Welcome to the Royal Red, where we recount short history lessons in both English and Spanish. If you wish to listen to the Spanish translation of this video, the link is in the description. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Imagine inheriting a kingdom you never fought for. Now imagine inheriting several, not through conquest, not through revolution, but through birth alone. By the early 16th century, one family ruled territories stretching from Spain to Austria, from the Low Countries to southern Italy. Their empire crossed languages, cultures and borders, and yet no single army had created it. Instead, it was built quietly, in candlelit halls, at wedding feasts, in marriage contracts written generations before their consequences were felt. While other dynasties chased glory on the battlefield, this family mastered something far more enduring: inheritance. Their strategy was simple, almost unsettling in its patience. Let others fight, let others fall. They would wait. This is the story of the Habsburgs, a family that turned blood into power, patience into empire, and marriage into the most effective weapon Europe had ever seen. This is how one dynasty came to rule half of Europe, and what it cost them to hold it. Long before the Habsburgs ruled emperors and kings, they were almost invisible. In the early Middle Ages, they were minor nobles living in what is now northern Switzerland, named after a modest fortress, Habsburg, the Hawk's Castle. It was not an impressive place, no great city, no ancient crown, no legendary army, but it gave the family something crucial: a name and a foothold. In medieval Europe, power often belonged not to the strongest, but to those who survived long enough to inherit it. The Habsburgs understood this early. They married carefully, rarely above their station, but always with an eye toward the future. A small county gained here, a disputed claim secured there. Their rise truly began in the 13th century during a period of uncertainty in the Holy Roman Empire. After years without strong leadership, the princes of the empire sought a ruler who would not threaten their own power. In 1273 they chose Rudolf of Habsburg. Rudolf was not the most powerful candidate. That was precisely the point. He was seen as manageable, useful, but not dangerous. Yet Rudolf proved far more ambitious than expected. Once elected King of the Romans, he moved quickly to secure Austria and Styria for his family, defeating rival claimants and establishing the Habsburgs in lands far richer than their Swiss origins. According to later chroniclers, Rudolf understood that titles alone meant nothing without land, and land meant inheritance. From this moment on, the Habsburgs focused relentlessly on legitimacy. They sought recognition from the church. They cultivated loyalty among local nobles, and above all they married into families whose lines were fragile, whose heirs were few, and whose lands might soon pass quietly to another name. Over generations, this strategy became tradition. The Habsburgs did not rush history. They allowed it to unfold, and stepped forward only when the moment was right. In 1477, Europe held its breath. Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, lay dead on a frozen battlefield near Nancy. He had spent his life trying to build a kingdom that could rival France itself. Instead, he left behind something far more fragile: a single daughter. Her name was Mary of Burgundy. She was young, intelligent, and suddenly the most sought-after bride in Europe. Burgundy was not just land, it was wealth. Its cities, Bruges, Ghent, Antwerp, were among the richest in the world, driven by trade, banking, and cloth. Whoever married Mary would inherit not only territory, but control over Europe's economic heart. France moved quickly, hoping to absorb Burgundy by force or marriage. Mary resisted. Instead, she chose Maximilian of Habsburg. Maximilian was ambitious, energetic, and painfully aware of the stakes. Contemporary accounts describe him as restless, always planning, always moving, very different from the image of a passive prince. Their marriage was rushed, almost desperate, and it changed the course of European history. For the Habsburgs, this was the greatest leap they had ever made. But it came at a cost. Burgundy was restless, its nobles suspicious, its cities fiercely independent. Maximilian spent years fighting revolts, negotiating loyalties, and defending lands he had inherited but not yet truly ruled. Then tragedy struck. In 1482, Mary fell from her horse during a hunt. She died days later, leaving Maximilian a widower and regent for their young son, Philip. According to court accounts, Maximilian was deeply shaken. He had won Burgundy through marriage and nearly lost it through circumstance. Once again, the Habsburg lesson was reinforced. Inheritance could create power, but only constant vigilance could keep it. Their son Philip grew up surrounded by wealth, ceremony and expectation. He became known as Philip the Handsome, tall, charming and politically valuable. In 1496 he was married to Joanna of Castile. Joanna was the daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the rulers who had unified Spain, expelled the last Muslim kingdom from Iberia, and sponsored Christopher Columbus. At the time, this marriage appeared symbolic rather than transformative. Joanna was not expected to inherit Spain. She was one child among many, but history has a way of narrowing its focus. One by one, Joanna's siblings died. Suddenly she stood next in line. Philip became king consort of Castile, not through conquest but through proximity. Their marriage, however, was deeply strained. Contemporary sources describe intense jealousy, political rivalry, and mutual mistrust. Joanna's later reputation as Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad, has often overshadowed the reality of her situation. She was isolated, controlled, used as a political tool by her husband and her father. When Philip died suddenly in 1506, possibly from illness, possibly poisoning, Joanna's grief became legend. She reportedly refused to be separated from his body, travelling with his coffin for months. Whether this was madness or mourning, history still debates. What is certain is this: their son inherited everything, and he would become the embodiment of the Habsburg web. Charles was born in Ghent in 1500. He was raised far from Spain, surrounded by Flemish advisors and Burgundian customs. When he first arrived in Spain as king, he barely spoke the language. Many saw him as a foreigner, and yet inheritance recognised no borders. By his early 20s, Charles ruled Spain, Burgundy, Austria, southern Italy, and vast territories across the Holy Roman Empire. In 1519, he was elected emperor, a title that required enormous bribes, diplomacy, and promises. One ambassador famously remarked that Charles ruled an empire on which the sun never sets. The phrase was not meant as praise, it was a warning. Charles spent his life travelling endlessly, Spain to Germany, Italy to the Low Countries, never at rest. He faced religious upheaval, constant war with France, and the impossible task of governing lands that shared nothing but his name. Letters from his court describe a man increasingly exhausted, burdened by responsibility rather than empowered by it. In private, Charles reportedly longed for retreat. In 1556 he abdicated, something almost unheard of for a ruler of his stature. He withdrew to a monastery, leaving behind the greatest inheritance Europe had ever seen. The Habsburgs had mastered inheritance, but mastery came with consequences. To keep their lands united, they married within the family, cousins, uncles and nieces. Over generations, the results became visible. Weak health, distinct physical traits, fragile successions. Charles divided his empire, Spain to his son, Austria to his brother, hoping to prevent collapse. The web loosened, but its influence endured. Wars would be fought over Habsburg claims. Dynasties would rise and fall in response to their marriages. Their story reveals a quiet truth about history. Power is not always seized. Sometimes it is inherited, slowly, patiently, and at great cost. The Habsburgs ruled half of Europe not through conquest, but through blood, and their legacy reminds us that every empire, no matter how vast, is held together by human choices. choices made at weddings and contracts, and in the fragile hope that the next generation will hold what the last one built. Thank you very much for listening to The Royal Red. Please like and subscribe for more. If you have any suggestions for our next video, please leave a comment.